everyone, welcome to the Horror Room. I'm Travis Bruce, and today we're doing another Women of Horror Spotlight. Today I have with us, she's an author, and she has her debut novel out right now called No Quarter. I have with us Amanda Worthington. Amanda, welcome to the Horror Room.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure having you on. So tell us a little bit about No Quarter.
Yeah, so No Quarter is my debut. It's actually novella length, so I refer to it as my novella in verse. It's actually a narrative, so like a story, like a novel, but it's told in poetic form. So it kind of the idea came to me in stages, but it is essentially this idea of generational trauma being passed down from grandmother to mother to daughter. And this trauma kind of revolves around this tree that is a bit more than a tree, that is kind of possessed by this demonic force. But it's a little bit cryptic, and a lot of the trauma is focused around this kind of ritual that's passed down, that's referred to as the planting. And so I get more into it as the book goes on, but it's this main character whose name is Amelia, trying to, kind of come to terms. Do you do what you've been taught to do your whole life? Or do you start asking questions and possibly resist? So
that's a powerful narrative for a story. Now, what were some things that gave you inspiration for reading?
Honestly, and this is going to sound a little hilarious probably, but my first ever horror encounter when I was a kid was watching The Wizard of Oz.
A lot of people say that.
So, yeah. So the thing there's this scene with these apple trees that grab at Dorothy while she's picking the apples. That just terrified me. And I don't know, I think that kind of worked its way into my psyche. And so I'm just I don't know, I leave my house terrified of trees, but kind of there is this kind of connection there. And then I started thinking, I don't know. I started thinking, yeah, what if the tree was possessed? And what if, there was this kind of force that was kept alive through a planting? And what if you had a world full of such trees? And, I also was inspired. I get inspired by reading a lot of nonfiction too, reading NPR things, listening to NPR and watching documentaries and that kind of thing. And I had recently, shortly before I started No Quarter, I learned that trees actually have this really intricate root system where they're able to communicate with one another about, how much water they need. And just, it's incredible. They're almost sentient in that sense. So that kind of contributed as well.
That's incredible. Now, you talk about a powerful subject, which is generational trauma. Unfortunately, that's a real thing. It's something that, hurt people usually hurt people. So
yes.
So a lot of times we look at trauma in the real world, it's usually something that's passed on from generation to generation. Now, did you do any research on that?
I won't say that I did a lot of research on generational trauma, but I feel like I have lived it in many ways. So I feel like my own experiences, I have a hard time separating what I've been through sometimes from the things that I write. So a lot of times, even if it's not overt, I will kind of at least hint at some of the things I've been through. An example, there's a chapter/poem in No Quarter about the grandmother who's she's the first to kill a man and to let his blood feed the tree, which is part of the planting, as we learn. And she's an alcoholic, and there's a lot to that. And in fact, my own grandmother was an alcoholic, which I learned later in life. And there are a lot of, she was also very codependent in her relationships, and that kind of gets passed down. So in addition to it being about generational trauma, I think No Quarter is specifically about the generational trauma that's kind of passed down by the women specifically. of a family, the ways that we're taught to be and to not be, and kind of learning to question that. And when you have a thing such as the planning and such as this kind of force that's giving you power, why would you want to give that up in a world that strips you of your power in so many other ways? So
totally agree. Now, how long did it take you to collaborate these stories together?
I will say that I'm a little bit different than a lot of writers in that I don't normally write things in order. I tend to think in terms of scenes, so kind of more cinematography kind of oriented. But it probably took me about a year when you consider the writing, the editing. I had people look over what I had written, of course, and get some other eyes on it. Coming up with finding the right cover for it. There's a lot that goes into it. So I did write it kind of out of order, and then the fun part is kind of assembling it. Is what I prefer to do. What I find works for me is I'll have a very vivid scene in my head, and then I need to write that scene or that element, and then once I have them, what I feel like is a complete story, it's a matter of assembling the puzzle pieces to create the narrative that I want to have. So,
and that seems like a common thing with a lot of authors I've interviewed. I'm thinking, listen, I've never wrote a book or a story before, but I would think I would go from beginning to end, the normal route. But I've interviewed a lot of authors, and some of them, they start off with an ending, and they work their way forward. Or, they're just, like you say, put pieces together and then put it. And I'm like, wow, that's an interesting thought process.
Yeah, it's kind of like when the inspiration strikes, that's the place I start. And then I try to figure out, is this a scene that's more close to the beginning of the work or further along? Is this something right in the middle? I have to admit also, I'm totally a pantser. I'm not a really good planner. And so I am learning to be more of a planner, but I don't know what it is. I'm just really strongly opposed to outlines. And I'm trying to change that slowly, but I think that has something to do with it too.
I'm horrible at planning as well. By the way, anybody who's watching it, if you have an interview scheduled with me, if I haven't reached out to you and it said, hey, we're still on, please reach out to me, because I'm all over the place. But so I totally understand what you mean. Now, this being your first novella, I can imagine it was a little bit nervous. I mean, you were a little nervous, and the anticipation, getting it out there, getting it together. Tell us a little bit about that process, the editing and so forth.
Yeah. There is kind of a nervousness that comes along with it. And I think for me, it's mainly, are people going to like it? Are people going to get it and relate to it and get something out of it? Because I can feel very powerfully writing a thing, but my job as a writer is to also ensure that anyone reading it is able to have a good experience reading it. So of course, a little bit nervous about that, which is why I made use of beta readers and had a lot of people, look at it in its raw form and make suggestions about what should go where, and even suggestions of changing some of the metaphors that I use in some of the poetry to strengthen it, little things like that. Editing is a part of the process that takes a lot of work. It's not necessarily the most riveting thing sometimes. It's not the creative part of the process, but it is very, very much important, very integral to, getting a good outcome. So yeah, of course there's some nervousness, but it's also understanding that the whole thing is a process and trusting in the process and taking my time, because I think too many writers get really excited about an idea and just throw it out into the world before it's ready. So I wanted to make sure that it was in the form, that No Quarter was in the form I wanted it to be before I put it out there for people to order and read. So
Now, how exciting was it to finally get it out there, and you started getting feedback that people were enjoying reading your novella?
Yeah, it was great. I didn't. I have to admit, it being my first real fictitious thing that I've put out. I do have a couple other collections of poetry that I've put out, poetry collections, but they're not kind of bound by a theme or anything like that. So this was the first fictitious thing I put out. And I wasn't sure what to expect because it is so different. But people overall really liked that it was different and that it wasn't like everything else that they had read before. So it was very exciting to see people really engage with it and engage with it to the point that they wanted to evangelize it. So they wanted to go out there and, tell other people about it. I still have a couple of friends that, every time the opportunity comes up, they're telling people about it because it affected them in that way and asking when the next one is coming and, that kind of thing. So that's always very exciting.
Now, I'm going to ask some fun questions now. Now, when it comes to your writing habits, do you have a certain place you like to write? Or could you pretty much write anywhere at a certain time? You have to have certain type of music on. Tell me a little bit about your writing habits.
Yeah, I think I've gotten kind of to the point where I don't necessarily have to have certain conditions to write. I do try to, if I'm serious, like this is my writing time, I will sometimes listen to instrumental music, but I can't have anything with words in it, or else I will inadvertently, write some of the words down. It just happens, brain does a thing. But I have also written poetry, written poems completely in the notes section of my phone. So like if I happen to be a place and the idea strikes me, I will sometimes write a few lines to start a thing. I like longhand writing, so to generate ideas. So it's kind of interesting. I like longhand to generate ideas, but then when I'm kind of pulling things together, I prefer to type. So I do have a tablet where I will open up the notes and just, sometimes write with the stylus, like freehand, and just, convert it over to like a Word document and work on it that way. But I find that for generating the ideas themselves, it helps me to kind of slow down a little bit and write longhand. So
what made you decide, you know what? I've been doing all this poetry. I love writing. You know what? I'm going to put it into a book form. So for everybody to see.
Yeah, I've written since I was very young. I had my first thing published when I was like 5 or 6 years old. And so I don't know, I've always gravitated towards it. It was always a way that I could express myself well. And I've just kind of worked on it throughout the years and have had other people say they wish I wrote more. And that, of course, inspires you to keep doing it. I feel like at my heart, I am a storyteller. And I feel like I have important things to say that I want the world to hear. And I do feel like I have a special, I won't say talent, but I do have a special interest in doing something a little bit different. I don't like writing a thing that's been written to death. I like putting a new spin on things. I like retelling things from a different point of view. So I think I think differently. And I think people really gravitate towards that, and seeing that people gravitate towards that really encourages me to keep going. And I don't always, maybe it's the lack of outlining at this point, but like I don't always know where I'm going, and there is a certain excitement to that, I think.
Yeah, is it a struggle as an indie writer to, as most indie writers, by the way, I'm making a huge assumption right now, but like most indie creators, yes, you are, unfortunately, your love, your passion is a part-time job, and then you have your full-time career. Is that something tough to juggle?
It can be. I actually work in publishing. Oddly enough, I actually work in academic publishing. So I work on getting textbooks put out into the world. So when I do kind of change gears and work on my own stuff, it's a very different process. It's a very different kind of writing. But I have been researching and writing all day, so that part of my brain is going. I just kind of have to start thinking in a little bit of a different way. As far as time management, it's time management. I do try to carve out time every day to write, just because it is important to me and it's important for my mental health, and it just helps me be at my best. But like, time management is really what it comes down to. Even if you can take 30 minutes a day to write, it's like in the morning or at night before you go to bed. I think we make time for the things that we really value, and it's what it comes down to. And you're gonna watch hours of Netflix, or you're gonna like spend part of that time writing. So yeah,
I agree. Now, have you always been a horror fan?
Yeah, pretty much. So I read my first horror book when I was about 12, I believe. I read Salem's Lot by Stephen King, and I was just like hooked for life. That being said, I've been more of a reader of horror. I've been a horror reader for a lot longer than I've been a horror writer. So I was primarily writing stories that would more fit into sci-fi and fantasy, I would say, than having that horror element to them. So the horror writing is a thing that I've recently gotten into. I've probably been doing it for about 2 or 3 years now. Whereas sci-fi fantasy goes back a long way. But I like that because I often blend those elements together in the things that I write too. But yeah, I've been a fan for a lot longer than I've actually been a creator. So.
Well, I don't know if you've seen my channel before, but we're going to go to the fun part of the interview. Well, actually, this is a horror channel. All right, so I'm going to ask you 3 horror questions.
Okay.
Ready? All right.
I'm ready.
First one. What iconic horror character do you feel like you relate with or to the most?
This is going to sound really weird, but I really dig Hannibal Lecter. Like, he just seems like, besides the cannibal thing, he'd be real fun to see some opera with, drink some wine.
Yeah, I mean, he's a well-cultured guy. I mean, he's definitely a well-cultured individual. Like, he likes to eat people. So, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, it's just a little,
And that's no biggie, right?
Detail.
Second question. What was the first horror movie that scared the shit out of you?
I'm gonna go back to The Wizard of Oz. I know it's not traditionally thought of as a horror movie, but the trees in The Wizard of Oz, oh my God. Got to me.
And the final question, if any iconic horror filmmaker could take your project, No Quarter, and make it into a feature-length film, who would you want it to be?
Oh, that's actually a really hard one. Let me think. Honestly, can we do Living or Dead?
Living, Dead, either one.
I could see a Hitchcock thing.
It does sound like a little bit of a Hitchcock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's coming to mind for some reason. So
maybe even Wes Craven could adapt that, I think. Well.
Yeah. That's one I have to kind of think about.
Yeah.
Because there's so many great, so much great potential out there. So many great examples. I don't know. I'd have to think about that. And I think I'd kind of approach it in different ways too. Like, who can, handle the characters well, who can handle the story well, who can make this, cryptic without being confusing. I don't know. I'd have to think about it.
So where can everyone find you, Amanda?
I am online at the amandalaeffect.com, and that's the THE Amanda, my name, with LA at the end of my name, effect.com. It's kind of like the Mandela effect. The Mandela effect.
I like that.
And yeah, so I have most of my updates and some sample work on there. And anyone who is in the Midwest and interested, I also chair the Missouri, Kansas chapter of the Horror Writers Association. And we have a website for that as well. And that is horrorintheheartland.com.
And both of the links will be down in the description box. So definitely click on them and check them out. Amanda, we're going to be running into a lot of each other because you hang out with the Psychotoxin crew and I love them too. So we're going to be running into each other a lot. But thank you for coming on to the Horror Room. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for coming to the Horror Room. I'm Travis Spruce. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.